is Obsidian Stout from Deschutes Brewing in Bend, Oregon. I chose this beer. So this is an American stout. So there are multiple stout styles out there, from Irish stout to imperial stout, American stout. There are all sorts of stout styles. So I chose an American stout, one of the things that defines an American stout is a higher hopping rate. So it is a more bitter stout than the European styles. The reason I chose this beer to go with this first reading is because of where I saw mentally these characters were, the two speakers in this, both in the prologue and in the part that follows. They're in really dark, bitter places mentally. So what I wanted was a beer to reflect that bitterness and dark mental state. So I chose an American stout, a black, bitter beer. So cheers, Laura.
Yes, cheers. There we go.
You have the actual beer this time, yes?
Cheers.
Yes.
I got two. Cheers with the water bottle. I got two of the beers. I was at Hy-Vee. I'm sorry, not Hy-Vee, at Total Wine. And their system told them that they had two of the third beer, I think it is, coming up. Yeah. But we couldn't find it anywhere. So I have this, and I have, I don't know. I don't want to, give a spoiler.
What do you think of this one? This seems to me like a beer you would like, except maybe it's too bitter.
It's a little bit on the bitter side, but I do like it. And as I've said long since, I'm slowly developing a taste. It's taken you, 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Bit by bit, you got me from sometimes liking one beer to often liking two of them.
There you go.
This one. I had to buy a 6-pack, so I admit I had one last.
Yeah, I had to buy a 6-pack too.
Yeah, stinks, doesn't it? Life's rough. All right, Judy, do you want to read? Tell us briefly about the book before you read.
Well, again, it's about people getting in trouble and their reaction, how they do it. I have my main character innocently got involved because of a death, and she was transferred to a new position at her company.
And the book is called?
See That House.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason this book main plot is that this woman stands on a hill with her 2 small children year after year saying, see that house, we should be living there. And she says over and over until finally, when they're old enough, she says, see that house, the man that raped me lives there. You are his son. And my other son is from a different father. And we should be living in that house. And so that is the premise of, she wants to make this man severely pay for what he did to her, because she had a whole life planned out at 15, but then he raped her and made her pregnant.
Okay, go ahead, prologue.
The woman leaned against a tree at the edge of the thick woods and stared at the Mason Crow mansion in the distance. 50 years ago, she'd stood here, her father's rifle in hand, willing to kill her rapist, Charles Mason Crow I. When he stepped out onto the patio, she'd pressed the gun to her shoulder and aimed at his chest. But her finger refused to pull the trigger, so she leaned over and put the rifle under her chin. The kick of the baby growing inside her stopped her. Racing away in tears, she found an unlocked church and hid inside a closet. She was supposed to be the first in her family to graduate high school, go to college, and become a teacher. When her parents learned that she was pregnant, they'd thrown her clothes in a suitcase and told her to never come back. It didn't matter that she was 15 or that she'd been raped. She'd shamed them. Now she looked down at the grass beneath her feet. It looked the same as it had all those years ago. the ones that she brought Marshall, her son, by Charles Mason Crowe, and Jackson, her son, by her dead husband, to stand on this very spot. She'd point at the mansion and say, "See that big house?" They'd nod and promise her someday they'd ruin the man who lived there because he had hurt her, their mother.
Yes, very dark.
Yeah.
Before jumping into the story itself, tell us a little bit about your writer group and how fantastic it is, especially some of the members, not to name names. But seriously, tell us.
Laura said.
Oh, no, I wasn't thinking of myself at all.
Oh, okay.
No. Tell us about Night Riders and how you got started, because we actually have a history, 35 years now, I think.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Tell us about starting Night Riders, even before it was Night Riders.
It was, one of those little innocent things where a friend says, I have a friend who wants to get a job writing creative writing. She wants to teach it. But she doesn't have the degree to go be a college teacher, but she would like to do this at the community school. And she needs to show them that people are interested in what she has to say. So I went along with Lynn LeCourcier, who is in our group, and a couple of other people. And we would meet, and Ross.
Jenny.
Yeah. Jenny is very late, yes. But we would meet on Mondays and read a practice piece. We weren't writing novels much at that time. We were just starting. So we would read and we'd critique each other. And sometimes we had a very hilarious time because Ross was reading something very serious, sex scene, which she wasn't comfortable writing. And Lynn thought it was so great. She jumped up and went over to the other side of the room, waving herself. It was such a great one.
Yeah.
And he said, "What's the matter? What'd they do? That's what's wrong. Why is everybody laughing?" So that's the kind of meetings we had. And the wonderful thing that I love about our writers group is one person doesn't tell the other person how you're supposed to write. No, they say, right here, I can't see the scene. Or right here, I think the person should be a little more upset. But we don't say, oh, I don't think they should have gone out in the garage and had a beer. They should have stayed here. We don't do that. We don't try to.
Sometimes we do. Like, for instance, when Jack and Judd and Ross were all coming pretty regularly, there would be times that one of us, on the side of the table would write something, and one of them would say,
no way.
Yeah. Like I remember there was one phrase I used, and all the men in the room just said, a man doesn't phrase it like that. He just doesn't. Who knew? It was a totally innocuous thing. I think it was where Sean is telling Amy, I want to make it right for you, or, I want to make amends, or whatever. However I phrased it, it was this, like, who would think that would be different? But all the men in the room were absolutely insistent a man would not phrase it that way. So,
and that's what I'm talking about. They didn't say, don't put that scene in.
Mm-hmm.
You should have skipped that. No, they help you write it better.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly. They've always seen things a little differently sometimes.
Oh, yes, it can get quite interesting.
There's that one phrase I wrote about Sean after he killed the wolf, and that infamous line will go down in history. And for the record, I can see Michael's face. What was it? So,
well, my example was when I was saying that somebody had a Hummer.
Yeah.
And Judd explained to me what a Hummer is these days, so I dropped that out.
Yeah. So Michael, what happened in this scene with Sean? He's caught in medieval Scotland, and he ends up being attacked by a wolf and kills it. And he's with this medieval woman and a monk, and they both say, well, we need to take the meat with us. And, you know, so they kind of slaughter the wolf and they take the meat because they don't know when they're going to eat again. And they wrap it in leaves and he's carrying it. And when they get to her Uncle Hugh, he reaches out to shake the hand. Well, you know, as I'm picturing the scene, he's carrying this, you know, this meat. And so I wrote, he shifted his package of wolf meat to the other hand. In all innocence.
You know, I should have let you leave that in.
Directly wrong with that. Conjure up images.
It was a totally different book, but I read that. Judd and Jack both just, they were rolling on the floor. I'm like, what? They're like, think about it. All of this has, you know, it's always been interesting. So, anyway, let's get into the book itself. How did See That House get its start? What was the genesis of the idea?
Well, I like to give ordinary people a problem, and I was traveling in Arizona, and there was, in the distance, there was this most beautiful home. Looking out there, and I thought, oh, and I think I said to the person I was with, see that house?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stuck with me. And I thought, all right, if somebody's envious of a house, why? And so I didn't want it to be an evil book where, you know, horrible things happen. I wanted it to be something that could happen in a person's life. And so I just started with See That House. The one mistake I made is I just started writing it as I felt it. But then I had to go back and put more in or take stuff out or add another person. And I always wished that I had thought it out quite a bit more before I actually sat down to write.
So in the question of, are you a plotter or a pantser? One wrote by the seat of your pants.
Yes, yeah, right.
Now, you were in nursing, so what kind of research did you have to do to write a book about corporate financial shenanigans and this whole idea of honeypots that comes into play later?
Well, I have this lovely imagination, and one of the things that I enjoy by writing is when I create a character, they can be devious. And so I just thought, what could you do within a corporation that wouldn't raise flags, which wouldn't be seen easily by somebody else? So I just slowly, and rephrase your question again.
What kind of research did you have to do to get into this whole world of corporate finance and the honeypots that come into play at the end of the book?
I had a friend of a friend work for one of the local large companies here, and I would ask him questions and say, if I did this, would it be seen? Would another person working there notice that there's been a slight shift in the data? And he said, no, especially if you put it into this department, who is just basically looking to see that the company is progressing financially, not all of the details. And so that's how I did it. And then with that, rest of it is my imagination and listening to the daily news and the newspapers that tell you all this corruption that's going on. It's easy to